thank you. I was going to start it when you started, but
sorry.
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this British Council webinar provided by Transform ELT, which is mainly directed at teachers throughout the Middle East and North Africa, but we're delighted to see a number of people from much further afield, from Thailand, from Carlisle in the UK, from Sri Lanka, and from Peru, I think you said.
Yes, yes, so very.
So welcome to everyone.
Yeah.
My colleague, Julie Wallis, who will, I'm sure, introduce herself, but Julie is the owner-director of a small and vibrant school in northern Italy, in a town called Tiene. And she and I have worked together for a number of years. And I'm delighted to have her as our speaker this afternoon. Julie is going to be talking about, as you know, soft skills for language teachers. And you may have had time, I hope you've had time to investigate some of the pre-webinar reading that Julie announced, and to follow up some of the links that she provided. I'm sure you'll find this a really interesting session. It's going to, well, I'm not going to say too much and steal Julie's thunder, but I can assure you that it will be rather different from a lot of the teacher training and teacher development events that you might be familiar with, because it touches on a number of very important skills which don't always feature in our training syllabuses or our teacher development sessions. So a couple of bits of housekeeping. We have a chat box, which I'm sure you're familiar with. We also have a Q&A box, and we'd like to preserve the Q&A for cues, for questions, so that Julie and I can keep an eye on it. There'll be a couple of moments during the webinar when we'll pause to look at some of your questions, and again, of course, at the end. So please do keep your questions coming, but put them in the Q&A box so that we know where to find them. And if you're making any other comments, please put them in the chat box, because we'll be looking for questions in the Q&A box, and we might miss your question if you put it in the chat. The session is being recorded as we speak, and the recording will be available, or a link to the recording will be made available to all of you, and also to any colleagues who may have wanted to be here, but for some reason couldn't make it. So that will be available to everyone. People will be able to see it if they've missed the live event, but you will also be able to revisit it if you would like to. Some people are also asking about certificates, and yes, there will be a certificate of attendance provided by the British Council, and we will, I think we might have a link to send you in order to get hold of your certificate. But I think we have everyone's address through the email address through the registration procedure. So we'll know who's here. Zoom will give us an attendance list, and that will enable us to send you your certificate. So without any further ado, I'll formally welcome and introduce Julie. And yeah, Julie, over to you.
Thank you very much. So for anybody just joining, I will actually leave this to Alan after a while. In the chat, you will see a PDF which you can use during the talk just to help you navigate, as it were. So please download it, and we'll keep putting it there because I see the numbers are climbing as I talk. If that's okay by Alan.
Yes, of course.
So welcome everybody, and thank you very, very much for joining. It's a bit unusual, this one. It's not so much about teaching in the classroom as about how you can support your learners to develop and do better. So my name is Julie Wallis. I'm actually joining you from Italy, Schio, not Tiene, because I moved the school during COVID, but I'm joining you from Italy, northeast Italy. I'm a teacher trainer, and I'm president of a local or national association in Italy. I'm a schools inspector, which is actually something that gives me a lot of input because I get so many opportunities to watch teachers teaching in the classroom and to think about the learning process and what's happening in the classroom. So that's probably the thing that I do that most helps me learn. And I still teach, of course, just like you, because once a teacher, always a teacher. And I'm going to talk to you about how to help your learners achieve success. So you have a handout with you, and it's divided into 3 parts. You might like just to download it now. I'm afraid I can no longer see the chat as I have my presentation on, so hopefully Alan will be able to continually add that to the chat. But you don't have to use it. You can just take notes as we go along. So I'd like to start with a quote, and hopefully and immediately find that I'm blocked. So I'm going to stop and start again. Excuse me. No. Okay. Apologies for this one moment. I'm sure I'll get the tech under control in just a second. Right, so I'm going to start with a quote. A quote which I think is really important because the whole talk is going to be about the soft skill of listening, how to listen to people, how to listen in such a way that you help your learners develop. So knowing how to listen is key in all of the techniques and approaches that I intend to talk to you about today. So, are you listening? Are you ready? So I'm going to look at some of the techniques you may already know. You probably know all of these, or you've heard of them. You might not know what the difference between one or the other is. So counseling, co-counseling, mentoring, coaching, and tutoring. Now I am going to ask you to write in the chat, and let's see if anybody can come up with a difference. I'll give you just 2 minutes to write in the chat. Share the PDF immediately. While you think and write in the chat, yes. So anybody know the difference between counseling, co-counseling, mentoring, coaching? Aha. We have a few answers here already. So do read what other people put in the chat. Counseling is like giving advice, absolutely. Mentoring, providing support. Well, they're all providing support. I would agree with that. We've got something, tutoring is individualized learning support. Okay, let's go back and take them one by one. Just going to close the chat. So counseling first, firstly counseling. Counseling is a process of providing assistance and guidance to individuals. You're absolutely right. It's giving advice. It's advice in making decisions, dealing with challenges in their lives. In education, counselling is used to support students in their academic career or also in their social and emotional development. And school counsellors play a crucial role in supporting students in school environments. So counselling can vary a little bit from place to place, but let's think about it just within a school environment. So a counsellor in a school environment will provide individual and group counselling and guidance lessons and other services to support the students, and not necessarily only students. It could also be the academic staff or the staff as a whole. I don't know if your educational setting has an educational counsellor or service, but it assists students to make the right choices in their studies, or perhaps you have a counsellor or a careers officer to help them find their career path, or maybe to choose which stream they go into. If you have streams in your school, perhaps they are more scientific, or they're more inclined to work with language. You may even be somebody who helps them select a college or university, and it's giving support and advice. The role of a professional counsellor who's not within the educational system may be a little bit different, and perhaps looks more at psychological aspects. My sister, for example, is a counsellor and traumatologist. That means she's invited to go into schools to talk and listen to students who have had to overcome trauma or who have very specific problems. And she listens and gives advice. But of course, you might also want to help your students develop various academic and social skills, and that would also be counselling. So the goal of every counselling session with a school counsellor is to help students thrive and recognise their strengths, as well as improve their interpersonal relationships. So that's really counselling, whereas co-counselling would engage the students. One second. When we talk about co-counselling, we're talking about a method of peer-to-peer counselling. If you're thinking about using co-counselling, or if after this talk you want to, please be careful. You need to train students to co-counsel. You wouldn't be able to just say, here you are, get in there and work with another student, because co-counselling may bring up some trauma areas. It may bring up feelings. There may be a discussion on roles. There could be conflict, but there are also benefits to co-counselling. So co-counselling for students, for example, could encourage emotional release. You know, a co-counsellor, a friend, two students working together, or an older student with a younger student, perhaps, could enable the counsellee, if we can say that, to talk about moments where they've been hurt or upset. So they may end up crying or talk about feelings. They may even end up laughing, but it would need to be managed very, very carefully by a teacher or an education specialist. But in co-counselling, you could not focus on the areas that might be a little bit difficult to manage. You could also focus on increasing skills, such as being more attentive to the needs of others in the classroom, which would help you manage your groups and your classes. Or it might help if you set up co-counselling, form new allegiances, or actually avoid alliances where students group up into little groups and sometimes perhaps bully other students. So it might be a way of helping create a more solid group environment with more respect. Co-counselling functions by giving people an opportunity to work on whatever issues they choose with the accepting support of another person. But overall, co-counselling can be a beneficial method for students to work through their issues with the support of another person or another student. And it doesn't have to necessarily be, as I said, a student in the same class. It could be students of different ages or from different classes. And this might be very helpful in forming this group or this sense of belonging within a school or an educational setting. But as I said, it needs careful planning, guidance, and support. So we've looked at counselling, we've looked at co-counselling. Now we're going to look at mentoring. Mentoring and counselling are both forms of support. Somebody said in the beginning in the chat, oh, it's all about support. And all of these are about support, but the kind of support differs. They differ in their purpose and in their approach. So let me just mention some of the differences between mentoring and counselling to give you an idea. So mentoring is a process where an experienced professional offers advice and wisdom or knowledge that they've acquired to an inexperienced person. So in this case, it might be a teacher and a student, or a student that's acquired more skills in one area with a student who needs to acquire those skills, or an older student to another student, and so on. So whilst counselling is a process of providing assistance and guidance to individuals in making decisions and dealing with challenges in their lives, mentoring is really about imparting your knowledge and skills. And that might actually mean step by step showing somebody how to do something, for example. Mentoring focuses on professional growth, especially in terms of careers, but also in the educational area. And its main purpose is to help develop each individual and help them succeed in their role, whereas counselling works towards a greater self-perception and self-worth and allows clients to feel confident in their day-to-day way of being, shall we say. The mentor-mentee relationships can evolve into friendships over time. Now, that wouldn't happen in a coaching situation, because a coaching situation, which we're going to look at in a minute, is much more of a professional situation, although even coaching techniques can be brought into your classroom and to great effect. So mentor-mentee relationships can evolve into friendships over time and last for years, but a counselling relationship or a coaching relationship is more formal, and sessions are typically in a counsellor's office, and the duration is usually not long-term, like a mentoring relationship could be. Think about perhaps some of your learners might have heroes that they look up to, and they learn things from those heroes. Some of those heroes these days are YouTube heroes or something like that, where they're going on and learning to do something step by step. I saw all the lovely hobbies that you wrote in the beginning, and one of the things I learned to do during COVID was to macrame, which means you're making things like baskets out of string. And I learned that by following my mentor online and slowly, step by step, copying what they were doing in order to become proficient in the way that I wanted to be proficient. So it's slightly different from counselling. It's more directive. It provides advice and guidance, but it's based on the mentor's own experience. Whereas counselling is not really directive. It's not giving direction, although they also provide advice. So to sum up, mentoring is focused on professional growth and providing advice based on the mentor's own experience, while counselling is focused on emotional and mental health and providing support for individuals to work through their own issues, or to help guide them, give them direction in their career or in their development at school. That's also possible. Then we come to coaching. So coaching, something a bit different. I don't know if there are any qualified professional coaches in the audience today, but we're going to meet one in a minute. And coaching can be quite different, but even if you're not a professional, that shouldn't stop you looking at some of the techniques that coaches use. So coaching is a process of providing guidance to a client or a student on their goals and helping them reach their full potential. It tends to focus on helping a person grow holistically, the whole person. It's more performance oriented. Perhaps somebody has a goal, they tell their coach what the goal is, and the coach will ask a lot of questions to help that person find their way towards reaching that goal. And the coach might give their coachee homework after each session, but the coachee will have to agree to do that. The coachee makes a commitment to do that, and the coach also makes a commitment to the coachee. So some of the difference between coaching and mentoring, for example, coaching is non-directive, mentoring is directive. So that means it's about posing the right questions and providing the space, building the trust and giving confidence to the individual being coached to consider how they can achieve more and be successful and reach their objectives. Perhaps helping them find capabilities within themselves. And I often think that our students are far more capable than they realize they are. Just give them a project and you have your goals in place, and suddenly you find that they're exceeding the goals that you had in mind as a teacher. Coaching is typically structured and goal-oriented with a focus on developing the capabilities of a student and their motivation. It's usually a shorter-term relationship than mentoring. As I said, mentoring, you could become a friend for life. So it may be shorter term, but it's still an important relationship. It's of the moment. It's helping achieve goals and success at that time, but it's still a very important relationship. And it's focused on performance and effectiveness and achieving these goals. So we could say that coaching is focused on performance rather than on a particular skill and achieving goals, while mentoring is focused on perhaps growth, let's say educational growth and development, and providing advice based on the mentor's own experience. So there are two quite different things. A coach would not need to know anything about the area that the coachee has a goal for, let's say. The coach just asks questions to help the coachee find out how to achieve those goals. And usually the questions just keep coming and drilling down, and we're going to be looking at how to question later. So lastly, tutoring. Tutoring is a form of individualized learning, individualized learning support that's delivered by a professional usually, but not necessarily. Often a tutor is a teacher. We have tutors in my own school. The tutors I have are not the teachers, but they support the learners. If they have a problem in the classroom and they didn't understand something, they go to the tutor, so they're ready for the next lesson with the teacher, who may not have time to look at something very specific with them. Or our tutors help our students in their schoolwork, because I have a language school, but many of my students also attend schools outside our school. So the purpose of tutoring is to help students help themselves, or to assist or guide them to the point at which they become independent learners and thus no longer need a tutor. Okay, so the purpose of being a tutor is not to be needed anymore. That's your aim. So tutoring is self-paced, self-directed learning. It's a learning process that can improve a student's academic performance and their personal growth and self-esteem along with it, because of course, as they learn to do things, their self-esteem grows. And the tutors get to know the student's individual learning style. They can adapt their teaching methods accordingly. Tutoring can prepare students for tests and exams, and can also help students develop work and study habits that they'll use for life. So we're already looking here, I would say, in all these areas, at how to help learners with lifelong learning. So putting them on the right path in the beginning. The role of the tutor is diverse, and in order to establish a supportive relationship with their students, tutors have to be very open, very honest, and demonstrate a caring attitude. So if you don't like your student, don't go there. But I know all of you love your students, or you wouldn't be here. Humor can also be part of it. You might crack a joke now and then just to reduce the tension. And if somebody cracks a joke now, I'd be very happy, because I could do with a bit of release too. But overall, tutoring is a valuable form of support that can help students improve their academic performance and develop important skills for life. So my next question to you is not going to work, is what do they all have in common? Apologies, but I have got a problem once again, but I can ask you again. In the chat, please, what do you think they all have in common? Support. Guidance, support. Keep thinking. I've got something else in mind. So a keyword, but support is definitely one of them. Presence, that's interesting. Soft skills, yes. Guidance comes up again and again. Support, guidance, support. Still thinking about something else. I'm going to give you a clue. I'm going to point at something. Yes, listening, somebody is finally, yes. So all of them need listening skills, and that might mean different listening skills and different frameworks for listening. And we're going to look at that in the second part of my talk. So I'm just going to try and get back onto my slide. So we've said what they all have in common. Most of you have written support, and I think that's absolutely right. Support, guidance, but also learning to listen, and listening is going to be the main part of the talk today. So here are some ideas of the kind of role you might have. And I wonder if you can say, by looking at these, what do you think these roles refer to? A coach, a counsellor, or a mentor? Again, in the chat quickly. Advisor, advocate, agent, believer, collaborator, conductor, consultant, coordinator, listener, mediator, mentor, pedagogue comes up here. And I see some of you are writing in the chat already. Counselling, yes, it's absolutely, thank you, Amani, and it's about counselling. So these are the roles that you would need to be able to fulfill if you were a counsellor. Now, I seem to have a lot of technical problems today, so let's see if I can sort it out. On the other hand, if we look at the role of a coach for young people, and I really mean an exceptionally different coach, because most coaches learn to coach business people, or adults, and it's quite unusual to find coaches for young people. And I think if you were a coach for young people, you would need to be all of these things. I mean, you would need to be kind. And of course, most teachers are kind. That's why we go into it. You'd need to be reliable. That's really important. You need to be able to walk the talk. If you say you're going to do something, you need to be able to do it. This is a commitment, because remember, teachers are also leaders. And we have to lead people in the way we expect them to behave too. You would need to be empathetic and non-judgmental, and that's actually really important. You can't, as a coach, and this is what makes coaching difficult, you can't allow your own values and your own beliefs to get in the way of listening well to your coachee. So you can't allow yourself to judge somebody else because they don't live up to your values. Because as a coach, you're not giving advice. You're not telling someone what to do. You're asking them to tell you where they want to get to, what their goals are, and you're asking questions to help them find their way. And they may not necessarily be that way, that pathway may not necessarily be the one you would choose. You need to be able to set and maintain boundaries. So you need to understand very much the difference between the mentor and the coach, which is what I emphasized earlier. And of course, you need to be a fantastic listener and communicator. Even if you're a language teacher, doesn't mean you're a good communicator or a good listener. You need to practice listening skills, practice communicating, learning to do it well, and learning to choose the right listening role or intervention at the right time. You need to be empowering. You need to be able to let go a little bit, stand back, give over the control to your coachee. You're not the one who's in control. You're the listener. You're the person just helping and asking the right questions. Obviously, you need to be offering support, but you also need to be challenging at times. And you need to be flexible and adaptable and accepting too. You may need to adapt to your learner's time frame. Maybe they take longer to do something than you might, or to be ready to accept that the learner's objectives have changed due to context, perhaps, or to their circumstances, or to external circumstances. And you, the teacher, you, the coach, must always be ready to learn and grow. And that's, I think, the most wonderful thing about being a teacher. You know, we're all learners in a learning organization. That's, to me, the most exciting thing about being a teacher, the prospect of learning something new every day. Today, I've learned to enable the chat box. We're all in it together. We're all learning together. You need to have, of course, a very positive outlook with hope and belief in the young people that you work with. And I should think this is why most people go into teaching, actually, because we all want our learners to be successful. Now, I recently interviewed a colleague of mine in Sicily to find out more about her coaching experience. She's a professional coach, but she's focused particularly on young people. We're going to listen to Palmina La Rosa and what she has to say about coaching young people. But I want to tell you that it was my privilege to take part in a coaching project that she launched with a group of 26 18-year-old students last year. Now, the outcome of that project was that those students learnt to do a number of things, including producing learning materials for younger students between 12 and 13-year-olds. And they organized an entire event to teach these younger students how to learn. So it was quite a remarkable thing that she did. So let's listen to Palmina. I'd like to introduce you to Palmina La Rosa, who has her own language school in Catania. She has designed the Spire model that's been registered by the Ministry of Enterprises and made in Italy.
Thank you, Julie.
Pleasure. Palmina, what took you into coaching?
Well, Julie, it was a personal journey. I've always been the kind of person who needed to have a plan in life, no matter if it was a personal or professional one. But I felt I lacked the strategies to achieve my goals, and I wasted a lot of time and energy. I was then introduced to coaching by a friend when I moved from teaching to management, and the changes that coaching brought on me were unbelievable. So those actions, the actions that were uncertain, became clear and tangible. I knew exactly what to do, when to do it, but more than everything, why I needed to do those actions. And I became more capable to do things that I didn't believe I could do. I was able to speak up, I was able to be listened to, I learned how to delegate and to make the most of my stuff. And this became a real mission. So if coaching had been so beneficial to me, I wanted it to become common practice in my school. So I qualified as a professional coach and then specialized as team coach.
Okay, so who do you coach and why do you coach them?
Okay, so I coach students, mostly teenagers and young adults, and I train teachers on how to use coaching techniques. So according to my audience and the final objectives, the techniques and approaches change. So when I deliver coaching sessions to teenagers and young adults, I deliver both team coaching and one-to-one coaching. So I focus on the team as a whole and on each team member. We work on team performance while enhancing each team member's soft skills. When I deliver sessions to teachers, I train them how to use coaching techniques to support their students for both their personal and professional growth.
Sounds really interesting. So what are the outcomes for the learners?
Well, we have to go back to the idea of the spire model, okay? So the idea to design a model such as spire, which means set up, perform, inspire, review, and empower, was to help teachers to develop teamwork, project class management, students' life competencies, and entrepreneurial mindsets through clear procedures supported by ready-made materials on the more relevant coaching techniques. So, if I have to summarize the outcomes for the learners, I would say that they become familiar with all those techniques that will help them to define what a successful team is, how to create team vision, purpose, and values, how to define goals and measures, but without, but always with the individual in mind. So the team coach as a whole, as I said before, but then how each team member perform within the team. So through the eyes, or better from the point of view of the teacher, it's a way for them to learn the techniques. While from the point of view of the student will be able to enhance their soft skills, such as critical thinking, team building, effective communication, and much, much, much more.
That's really, really interesting. I know you've got a launch event to talk more about this, and it's quite unusual to have something that's completely aimed at students. Yeah. So if anybody's interested, they can sign up for your launch.
Yes.
Which will be at the end of my PowerPoint.
Yes. So the launch will be in December, and if you go to the spiremodel.coach website, you can join us for the launch event in December 12th. So I hope to see you all.
So let's look back at that spire model then. What Palmina is saying is that you begin by setting up a project, agreeing the aims and the scope of the project, the deadlines and the roles of each participant. Then you perform, you carry out the project, but you monitor the development continuously. You inspire your learners as they go, and of course they could inspire each other too. And this can be done by showing good leadership, support, enthusiasm, and listening carefully and constantly to their needs, or by inviting inspirational people into the learning and coaching context. You invite the learners then to reflect and review a sort of self-assessment, self-evaluation at agreed intervals, and help the learners set new personal and group goals where appropriate. And finally, you let go. This is their story, and in order to empower the learners, you need to trust your learners and step back. So I'm going to stop for a moment and say, are there any questions? Because that's an awful lot to take in before I move on to listening. I'm going to look at the question and answers, not in the chat. So I'll resend the document that somebody's asking again, but perhaps if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box, and I'll hang on a second for you to give you time to think and take in what you've just learned about. Oh, Dina, it's not finished yet. The really big bit is coming next. But thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, there are no questions coming in as far as I can see. I'll let Alan just interrupt me if he sees anything. So
There was one question earlier, Julie, about the possible role of AI, which you might like to address us.
Goodness me. Well, actually, that could take me on another journey.
Yes.
But very quickly, I will say that I do think that learners can, well, of course they can cheat and crib from AI, there's no doubt. But I think they can learn a lot from AI. Now, I actually did go and try to find out if there was any AI specific to language learning. And there is AI specific to language teaching, and I'll put a couple of examples, well, I'll put one in for you, twee.com. But there was nothing that was really specific unless you count Duolingo and so on. I would say not yet, not quite. I'm not saying that Duolingo and other similars aren't useful, but I don't think it's at the point of the coach, for example, that Palmina was. But it's a really good question. And you might like, as a teacher, though, to look at twee.com. I'll put it back in. It's www.twee.com, I believe. But you'll find it's very, very useful as a teacher. And I think you shouldn't avoid AI. You need to teach people, or mentor them perhaps in this case, to learn to use the tools that are available well, because there's no point in just getting AI to write something for you. So
And sorry,
a
couple of questions. What are the coaching techniques a teacher should use with young learners?
Well, that's a good one too. That's the teacher in me coming out now. So I would suggest that, first of all, again, listening. It's not in my talk, but I would suggest that with young learners, one of the things you can do is set objectives, and you can set and agree on objectives and write a rubric with your learners. There are, I'm afraid I can't tell you off the top of my head, but recently I've looked at examples of teachers eliciting goals and objectives from very young learners and agreeing with the young learners what the outcomes are going to be and how they're going to get there. So I personally thought it was absolutely great if you can get onto YouTube and find those examples. And if you can't, and you write to Alan Pulvaness, I will provide him with the links. If I get time later, before I end this session, I'll also try and pop the links in for you.
And one more, Julie, which I sympathize with, because there are a number of concepts to sort out. I know that you spoke about this at the beginning, but what's the main difference between coaching and counselling?
Gosh, so counselling in an educational context will be providing advice and guidance. I would say that's the main difference. A coach does not provide advice and guidance. A coach can't necessarily provide advice and guidance. A coach simply keeps asking you questions. You say what you want to achieve. Where would you like to be in 3 years' time? And then asks you what you intend to do to get there, and keeps asking questions until you come up with very practical next steps. And then they'll say, go away and work on that. come back next week and tell me how that went. And you'll do that and go back. So a coach is absolutely going towards a specific goal that you come up with. Although it could be that you're coaching a group as Palmina was, but a counsellor can give advice, give information. I think that's the biggest difference. Is that okay?
And just going back to the young learner question, there's a more specific one. Are the techniques you mentioned the same for much younger students, kindergarten? Does coaching operate at that age level?
I'm going to say that I don't have the experience to answer that question because I've hardly ever worked with kindergarten students. So I can't say that that would work, but I can say that if you write to Alan at the end, I will find out if it works. Off the top of my head, I would say no, but I don't know enough to answer that question. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Julie.
I'm going to move on then. And she says, hopefully. So really, all of these people, though, need to know how to listen. So you don't need to write in the chat here, but you can if you want. I'm not going to read it. Can you answer these questions? Do you think you're a good listener? And if you think you are, why? What's the difference between hearing and listening? And what are the benefits of listening and to whom? And let you think about that for a moment. And if you'd like to, you're welcome to write in the chat. So the question is really, what is a good listener? And, you know, how many of us listen and just wait to jump in and tell somebody what we know? How often are we just waiting for an opportunity to speak rather than focusing on what the listener is saying? And, you know, what is the difference between hearing and listening? So I think it's quite simple. Listening is very focused, whereas hearing, if you stop right now and just use your ears, you'll probably hear a number of sounds, but listening is really focused. And the benefits of listening are to the speaker, not the listener. That's quite important. So if you are listening, in any of the roles that we've talked about, or just as a teacher in a classroom, listening well is going to benefit the person speaking. I see that Mohammed Mustafa has his hand up, but I'm afraid I can't take any questions because you can't speak. So perhaps later when I stop again for questions, you can put your questions in the question and answer chat box. So how can active listening help your learners? Well, good listening is essentially a skill that can bring numerous benefits to both listening and the speaker, as I said. But, you know, you can encourage openness by listening well. It can encourage the speaker to be more open and be honest about their thoughts and their feelings. They might tell you more. If you're creating a safe learning environment, it means that your students feel that they can talk about anything, they can make mistakes. These are welcome in the classroom. And when the listener demonstrates unbiased acceptance and validation of the speaker's experience, it fosters these feelings of safety and acceptance in the classroom, which is already building trust. And when the listener gives the speaker their full attention, and by full attention, I mean physically looking at a person, moving towards them when they're speaking, giving them everything, not thinking, when is this going to finish? When will the bell ring? I can't wait to have a cup of coffee. That's not part of listening. This is giving your full attention in order to build trust. And that will communicate respect and show that the listener values, that you as a teacher value the student's thoughts and opinions. And by offering that respect, the student is more likely to start feeling valued and therefore more confident. And it just generally improves communication. I don't mean using good English particularly. I mean, it improves two-way, calm communication, clear communication. And this can lead to more productive and effective communication between the teacher and the student, but also between the students and the students. It also helps enhance retention. You retain what you've heard if you listen actively. I don't have it under my thumb, but I've done some research. There's actually a website dedicated to listening in the United States. And I have actually contacted them to find out more. But it's quite interesting, the information they put up. The amount you retain is very, very little. You might watch the news and half an hour later, you'll probably only remember 10%. But there are studies in this. So you really need to be very attentive and very mindful when somebody's speaking to you. And active listeners engage with the speaker. The information then it helps the listener, but it helps the speaker too. It makes them realize that, you really want to know more. You really want to help. And of course, reduces stress. I don't know what it's been like in the countries you all come from, because there are so many of them. But I'm sure you know that Italy was hit very hard by COVID. And I've seen many, many young people, especially within the age group of 11 to 16, develop anxiety attacks, and really finding it hard to communicate in the classroom. Taking the time and making the space for them is really, really important. We're adults, it was hard for us, but we didn't have to go through that at that very difficult age. 11 to 16, I would say, is quite an important age when everything's changing and you're learning about yourself and the world. So reducing stress by listening actively, I think, is very, very important. Now, there are different frameworks, and I might skip through this one because there's one I really want to focus on, which I think is more useful to you as teachers. If you start researching frameworks for listening, you'll come up with lots of ideas. Here are just a few. We've got discriminative listening, the ability to distinguish between sounds, pitches, and tones. Comprehensive listening, the ability to understand and make sense of the message being conveyed. It's kind of what we do when we ask our students to listen to a text in English. Listening, that's the ability to enjoy and appreciate the message being conveyed as well. And there are many, many more. Critical listening, the ability to evaluate and analyze the message being conveyed. Empathetic listening, sympathetic listening, appreciative listening, and therapeutic listening, when you're going into therapy. Now, I'm not going to go through this one in detail, but I am going to just look at two because this is going to echo later on in what I talk about, because empathetic listening is quite different to sympathetic listening. Sympathetic listening is when, you know, your partner or husband or wife or kid comes home and says, oh, I've had a terrible day, and you go, oh, poor you. But you're not really helping them overcome that. So empathetic listening is really, it involves feeling what someone else feels and putting yourself in their shoes. It's about understanding and sharing a person's feelings without judgment, always back to no judgment. It's not limited by your experience. It's all about the speaker's experience. So you're not listening as, I had a really bad, oh, you should have had mine. Mine was much worse. It's not that. It's not that. It's not your story, as I said. It can also help build really deep connections between people. So think about this when you go home this evening. Whereas sympathetic listening, you know, it's really about just listening to somebody and saying, oh yeah, really, it's a bit superficial, shall we say. So as I said, I'm not going to go deeply into this, but just enough to say that empathetic listening can really help build these deep connections between people, between teachers and learners, between learners and learners. So now I'm going to look at something completely different, and you're going to say, ah, why is she doing that? So the 5 whys is an unusual framework to bring to a group of teachers, I'm sure. It was originally conceived by, now I'm sure I'm not saying this correctly, Taiichi Ohno, who was a Japanese industrialist and the architect of the Toyota production system. Now, he thought that one way of solving problems was to use the 5 why technique. So he said that by repeating why 5 times, the nature of the problem, as well as its solution, will become clear. Therefore, Toyota is credited with this 5 whys technique, and you can already see here what's going on. For example, the vehicle won't start, the car won't start. Why? Well, the battery is dead. Why? Well, the alternator, I'm not a car mechanic, the alternator is not functioning. Why? The alternator belt is broken. Why? The alternator belt was well beyond its useful service life and not replaced. Why? Well, it wasn't maintained according to, okay, I don't need to go on with that one but you can see there are these why questions. Now, I have found in my own context here in my own school that this is a very useful system when you have a problem. But why is not the question to Delilah or anybody else. The question could be any WH question, I think, in our learning context. So why, or what, when, how, all these questions can be useful. So you could take this into your classroom if there's a problem, perhaps a discipline problem, for example. You state the problem or the issue that you're trying to resolve, and then you check that everybody agrees on that is the problem, because you may not agree on that. Then you find as much information as you can to illustrate the problem, to explain the problem. And then you start asking the first question, why or what or who or when. It shouldn't be a blaming situation. And you encourage the team to work in small groups to generate possibilities and ask the second why, and so on. So let's have a go as teachers. What kind of questions could you ask here? Ibrahim, your student, is always late handing in his homework. He's a good student. He's very polite. He's well behaved in class. He participates, but he's always late handing in his homework. So I'm going to ask you actually, so that I don't have to click off my slides. Perhaps you can tell me what people write in the chat, Alan, here. What kind of questions could you ask Ibrahim?
Why are you late? Why are you late submitting your assignment?
Okay. Because I didn't have a pen.
But why are you always late?
Yeah, I can see them now. Is there too much homework? Okay, but that's not a why question. But they might say, the student might say, I've got so much homework. Or why didn't you buy a pen? Good, no, I haven't got the money to buy a pen, Vina. So why don't you ask for help is a bit judgmental. But yes, you're getting the idea. Why don't you have the money might be a little bit personal. But yeah, where is your pen? Did you have a pen? And so on. But keep asking questions. This is quite simple. When I actually wrote it, I originally thought that the questions could be something that the teachers discuss in a classroom. And then I realized that, of course, you could ask the student directly. But actually, how often do we go into the staff room and say, oh, my students did this today, it's a problem? Well, sit down and take the time to ask questions and find the answers. It's not something I think is always useful, the 5 whys technique, but it is quite powerful for problem solving. So something that you could consider. But let's move on to another framework. 6-cat listening framework. Now, this is quite different. 6-cat meaning 6 categories of listening. This is Heron's 6 categories of listening. And you'll see that we start with authoritative listening. Now, authoritative has 3 interventions, listening interventions beneath it. And we'll start with prescriptive, and then I'll show you the other 3. And I think you'll quite quickly know where a teacher should be. So let's have a look at prescriptive listening. This, you know, it's the most straightforward. You listen, you listen and answer. One thing you could think of here, let's say there's, I hope it doesn't happen, a fire in your school. And the student says, there's a fire. You say, right, everybody out. You tell them what to do and where to go. It's as simple as that. It's very straightforward. So the approach is generally used when time is of the essence. You don't have much time, or you're being very clear, maybe even disciplining. But be careful, because it does show a lack of trust. Informative, I can never say it, informative listening also involves passing on personal experience at performing a certain task to a learner to aid them in completing an assignment, for example, or to do it very well or efficiently. And this could also be considered mentoring, if you think about it. And the technique is generally used to provide help with tasks which the learner is familiar with or is within their skill set. So you've challenged them, but not too much. You know they're capable, but they're not quite proficient enough to be fully independent yet. So informative learning, I would put on a par with mentoring. Confronting, I think you can already guess, is quite aggressive, or can be aggressive. And it's certainly the most aggressive of these authoritative approaches. And it involves questioning the learner's approach to the task that you've given them, or the homework you've given them, and so on, in order to encourage them to consider other options, or to view the task in a different light, to take a different perspective. But I've thought about this one too, and although it does appear to be very aggressive, I wonder if perhaps this would also encourage critical thinking. I thought about it a long time when I was preparing the talk. I'd always considered that confronting people when listening was not a good thing. But I realized that I'd learnt an awful lot from a man that confronted me non-stop, and that was my father. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about my father. Everything I said, he said something different. Everything. I grew up with him confronting me on everything. Now that sounds terrible, but it wasn't done in a bad way. But suddenly, when I was 18, I don't remember what I said, but I remember saying, I think this, this, and this. And my father said, no, I think the opposite. And I was shocked because what I'd said was exactly what he told me. And I said to my father, but you said that you thought what I've just said. And he said, you never asked my opinion. And I suddenly realized at 18, it took a long time, 18 whole years, that basically what he'd been doing was making me think all the time from a different perspective, think outside the box, always try to see that there were other opinions, other ideas out there before forming my own. And I think that was very valuable. So although we could consider confronting to be really aggressive, I think if it's done in the right way, it could also be encouraging learners to use critical thinking skills, which I would argue is another soft skill, certainly a 21st century skill. And then we have facilitative listening. Now, the facilitative style is typical of teachers that understand the strengths and weaknesses of their individual learners within their group context. And they believe that they can rely on each individual to handle their tasks efficiently. Trust, we come back to trust again, and to go on to achieve a high standard. So we're not teachers that come in, oh, that student, they'll never learn. No, we're students saying, that student learns differently. I know they can achieve. I know they can be successful. How can I do that? So I think that you already know that I'm going to advocate facilitative listening for teachers. The question is, will you choose cathartic, active, or supportive? Sorry, I should have written cathartic, catalytic, or supportive. So cathartic listening means that you allow and encourage an individual student to express their emotions and frustrations. Now, you might like to start writing here because you've got a quiz in a minute. So cathartic, you're listening to emotions, you're asking people how they feel about things, you're tapping into emotional intelligence, if you like. And then once you've understood how they feel about something, you can work together and discuss a constructive solution. Apologies, I've made a mistake. The next one should be catalytic listening. Perhaps you'd write it in the chat for me, Alan. The aim of this approach is to help a learner reflect on their own abilities. So you're enabling them to reflect and find their own weaknesses, but also to find their strengths. So they're really looking and self-assessing everything they do or have done. And therefore, they learn where they can improve. They set their own goals. And, you help them recognize those strengths. So by doing this, the learner can see their work from an objective point of view and subsequently work to develop and resolve any knowledge or skills gaps. The person that asked me about coaching for young learners, as I said, what I saw on YouTube was an example of using Bloom's revised taxonomy with young learners to set objectives and write a rubric and assess themselves against that rubric. So perhaps that would come in here. And finally, supportive listening, which I think is where we all want to be. And the approach aims to build learner confidence and self-esteem. It's done by identifying and pointing out the individual strengths through qualifications, contributions, achievements, and so on. And by the way, take the time sometimes to ask your learners, write a list. I want 20, 50 things that you've achieved in the last week or the last month. And I suggest you do it for yourself too. It really builds self-esteem. Quite often we forget that very little things are actually achievements. Being here is an achievement, so well done everybody. But seriously, take the time to recognize and celebrate achievements. Supportive listening may also reinforce the individual, may reinforce their own values, or it may reinforce their sense of value within a group. Because if they start recognizing that they can also achieve, they will also begin to feel that they are valued and have value to offer the class. Now, I can't go through this as much as I'd like, because I really needed to be face to face, but I'm going to attempt to check to see what you've understood. So we'll just go, I'll give you 2 minutes to read through this. I'll give you 4 minutes actually. I start to see some thumbs up, I'll move forward. Quite aware of time. I'm going to move forward. Apologies if you haven't had time to read it, but it will be available afterwards. Oops, I've missed something, sorry. Oh, I'm going to stop. I haven't missed anything. I'm going to give you a situation, and the situation is that a student says, I hate learning English. I'm no good at it. I hate learning English. I'm no good at it. The question is, which of the ones you've just seen is correct and which is not? Is it confronting, informative, prescriptive, cathartic, catalytic, or supportive. So your student says, I hate learning. Wait a minute, I haven't told you what you say back yet. Too quick. I hate learning English, I'm no good at it. And the teacher says, that's strange. No, I heard that there's a new teacher and she's pretty relaxed and she's probably going to, sorry, I'm giving you the wrong one. That's strange. I've heard that, in fact, you're not very good and perhaps you shouldn't be studying English. Yes, you're right. Confronting. Well done, everybody. Well done for those who wrote confronting. Here's the next one. I hate learning English. I'm no good at it. Well, says the teacher or friend, I can give you some useful websites to help you if you want. Aha. Neda Salehi, well done. Yes, that's informative listening. You're giving information. Let's try another one then. So we've had confronting and informative. And we've got left, we've got cathartic, prescriptive, catalytic, and supportive. I hate learning English. I'm no good at it. Well, you should try signing up for a different subject, maths, for example. Yes, yes, Sarah, prescriptive, well done. I'll take the first one I see. I hate learning English, I'm no good at it. You sound angry, are you? Why do you feel this way? Well done, cathartic, yes. I hate learning English, I'm no good at it. This is the next one. Cathartic was correct, well done. Why is that exactly? Huria, you are right, catalytic. Why is that? We're asking questions. And finally, I hate learning English, I'm no good at it. Yet you're so good at speaking and listening. What do you need to better your reading and writing skills? Supportive, of course. Well done, everybody. You were obviously listening carefully. I'm going to leave the questions to the end because I'm very aware of time. At the very beginning, somebody said they were interested in neurolinguistic science. And I'm just going to look at a few other things that can be helpful. As I do so, I've realized that you can't see what I can see. So I'm just going to back to my slides. So some of these techniques you may know, and I'm not advocating them all. Neurolinguistic programming suggests ways of listening that to some extent could be considered manipulation. It's not what I would consider personally a humanistic approach, but I'm not saying that that's wrong. And one of the things neurolinguistic programming suggests is that you mirror somebody. So if somebody is sitting back, you sit back. If they put their hand here, you put your hand there. There's something about that birds of a feather flock together thing. So people feel, if they don't notice you're doing it, very comfortable and at ease. But it is a manipulative situation. But I'm not saying never use the techniques. Demand high, I would certainly suggest you look into demand high, and at the end you'll see a link to the website. Demand high is a technique, an approach that Jim Scrivener and Adrian Underhill suggest. It suggests that we don't always rubber stamp, they call it. We don't say yes, good to everything. We don't say yes to the first learner. So when you're asking your students a question and Arkan puts up his hand and says, and gets the answer right, you as a teacher don't say, very good, Arkan. You say, you sure? I didn't hear that. Oh, what about you, Milena? What did you hear? And you, Ibrahim? Oh, let's listen again. So you're constantly asking questions, and you're not being confrontational, but you are challenging. You're making sure that that learner who always has their hand up and always answers the question, thinks twice or 3 times, but you're also bringing in all your other learners. So you're really listening to what's happening in the classroom. Now, I had a talk with Alan about mindfulness. I'm not convinced that mindfulness is all it's set out to be. However, I do believe that the technique is a good way of just clearing your mind. If we have enough, we don't, minutes, I was going to get you to do it, but one way I do it with young children actually is I get them just to use their eyes and find something they haven't seen, look around them and focus on it. Perhaps a crack in the wall or a mark on the table. Then they close their eyes and they listen. Sound they haven't heard before. Then they have to think about what they feel, their clothes against their skin or the chair beneath them. Taste in their mouth, the smell around them. These are all ways of just focusing in on something for a moment, clearing your mind and starting afresh. I don't know if the science really, I do know that there was some research done where they said in the UK last year that actually there is no evidence that it's very helpful. But certainly for me as a teacher, when I've got a loud bunch of kids, it's quite useful just to calm things down for a moment. And learning-centered teaching, I've put that in, it's too much to go into now, but it's not about teacher-centered. It's not about the teacher being at the front of the classroom. And it's not about all the activities being learner-centered. It's about the teacher being in the moment and listening to the students' voices. If they're not sure about something, or if they're really worried about something, you can hear it in their voices. You can see it in their body language. It's being a part of the learning process. And finally, a technique that I would like to see more of when I go and inspect schools, I'd like to see teachers taking a back step, not at the front of the classroom, listening to what the learners are doing, writing it down, writing down the wonderful things they say, writing down the mistakes, choosing a few of them, putting them on the board and saying, now I heard you say this, some of them are correct, some of them aren't, work with a partner, which ones are correct, which ones aren't? How do we make them correct? What other words can we use? Really using the learners and the language they produce, listening carefully and selecting items to develop in the classroom. And that would take me straight back to learning-centered. I know I'm slightly out of time, but I did start 5 minutes late. So if there are any questions and if Alan will allow me, I'm happy to take them.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Yes, of course, Julie. Let me unpin you and let me come in. Okay.
If you allow me, I'll just share the last 2 slides and take off the share. Yeah. So sure. There are references. You will be getting the video. But there are some references there. And just a quick reminder, the spire model.coach The launch is going to be in December, I believe, and you can sign up for free. And a thank you to everybody. So then I'll stop the share and answer the questions.
Okay. There was a comment earlier. I don't think it was actually in the form of a question. But somebody who pointed out or suggested that a number of the approaches, a number of the listening styles that you mentioned could very well occur in the space of a single lesson, and wondered what you thought about that. And there's a linked question actually, which was having all these roles played by this is something you said, this is a quote. At one point you said having all these roles played by the teacher might affect the process of teaching and learning. And the question is if you could elaborate a bit on that. And I thought it linked up with this comment about the teacher playing multiple roles within a single lesson.
Okay, first of all, I think, I hope you all think this. I actually think teaching is the hardest job in the world. Maybe a prime minister, but no, I think teaching is the hardest job in the world. I will give you that doctors have a difficult life, but we have to juggle all the time. We're thinking on our feet, we're trying to make principled decisions and trying to make the right decisions for our students, and we're trying to manage the class and make sure it's very, very hard. And so I do think that you are covering a number of roles. You might be, in my case, I might be the mother, the nurse, the supporter, the flag bearer. I may take on numbers of roles within the classroom, and certainly there are going to be different types of listening. And if I have to stop a child perhaps from poking another child's eye with a pencil, and the other child says, "Teacher, I'm going to make a snap decision," and it would be very much me prescribing, "Stop now." Absolutely. There are going to be moments. I don't like being that person, but there are moments it would be ridiculous to suggest there aren't. And I think there are all of those 6 categories of listening, and I tend to advocate those, come into play at different moments. I actually think it's very hard to get to the supportive listening stage. And I said I couldn't do it here, but I would suggest that you all take some time today and go home and ask somebody that you know to tell you about a problem that they have. And listen carefully and don't comment. Alan, you're the only person that I can demonstrate this with. Can you give me a little problem, please?
Gosh. Okay. I'm working with a group of teachers. This is a problem that's sort of immediate and on my mind today. I'm working with a group of teachers who are writing materials for a project, and one of them has presents some problems in the quality of their work and their ability to follow guidelines. There you are. That's my current problem.
So the quality?
Yes. I mean, my job as editor obviously includes a responsibility to deal with that. But it's let's say a delicate relationship. It's difficult for me to be too prescriptive. All the communication is by WhatsApp and by email, so that adds another level of lack of delicacy.
You said it's difficult for you to be too prescriptive?
Yes, because I don't want to undermine the relationship with this particular individual who's very willing and very committed. And also on a larger level, on a broader level, I don't want to undermine our relationship with the management of the project.
I'm going to stop you because
Okay.
but thank you very, very much.
You did ask.
Stop you, yes, and I'm happy to meet you afterwards and carry on if you want. However, I know that some people are going, and I just wanted to say that if you were listening, you'll have noticed that I didn't once comment except echo what Alan said.
And if I could sort of add to that and say, you know, I was aware that I wasn't getting any guidance or advice. I felt I was getting supported, and it was prompting me to dig a little deeper into my question, my issue. So I think it was
me that goes to Alan. So
I think it was working. Can we come to a couple of questions, Julie?
yes.
One is just a postscript to the point about different roles at different moments. And it's just a comment from one participant who said, I think quite wisely, I think these types of listening overlap, and
Yes.
it's very hard to deal with them as if they're completely separate and independent strands from each other. And I imagine you would concur with that.
I think to some extent they overlap, but I think, you know, cathartic, I didn't ask Alan, for example, had I was trying to be supportive, had I wanted to be more cathartic, I'd have said, so how do you feel about that, Alan? How's it making you feel? Are you frustrated? You know, he would have said frustrated. So there are clearly different types of questions you can ask. People probably won't know this person, but somebody who trained me, Lorraine Kennedy, who's also a life coach, always said to me that life is about asking the right questions. And I think that's really true. And perhaps not even a question, it could just be echoing something somebody said to show that you're interested. But it certainly isn't. And this is what I do a lot of the time. It certainly isn't waiting for a chance to say something about you, because if you're really focused on listening well, you're interested in the speaker and not about yourself. And unfortunately, most of us really want to talk about ourselves.
And a more specific question, which I think, you know, you have lots of experience to bring to, how to handle a teenager's emotions during counselling at a stage where, as you mentioned, the learners are very sensitive. Yeah. Any particular tips or advice which we can use when dealing with teenagers?
I can't physically show you, but I'll try. And this is something I learned from NLP. It's about taking control. I don't know if I appear nervous, but I am very nervous when I have to give a talk. And so I do exactly what I tell my teenagers to do. And I also teach my teenagers to do this before an exam or any test. I teach them to breathe well 4 times. There are some wonderful, I'll just pop it in the chat. If anybody has BBC Sounds, there are some tracks with, what's his name, Michael Mosley.
Just one thing.
Just one thing. I'm trying to write as quickly as I can. Which will, some of the things he tells you to do will teach you about breathing, in particular when he's talking about sleep, for example. So I'm not saying send your students to sleep, but learning to breathe and standing correctly, and standing with your feet slightly apart, and you're not leaning on anything, you're not to one side, and you're not too far forward or too far, finding your balance and breathing and focusing on yourself makes you very strong. I know that sounds a bit odd, but I get my students to then put out an arm, and another student has to, not like that, but try and push down their arm. And the first time the arm goes down, but then they try again and again, and I promise you they suddenly realize that they can be very strong, because what they're doing is they're no longer interested in the other person. They're focusing on themselves and being calm. And that helps them in situations, especially anxiety attacks. I have had, and I think I've told you actually, a student who was having anxiety attacks post-COVID. She was 12 years old. And every time she was asked to do anything, she just looked at the teacher and started to cry. I was in the classroom as an assistant. And the teacher, who wasn't very experienced, said, okay, sit down, forget it. And I think the last time I just said, permission, please, to deal with this. And I just took her outside and I taught her to just take control. And she needed it. And she went, I said, you don't have to give the talk if you don't want to. But if you do want to, you can. And if you want to stand up in front of the class and you want me to be there and hold your hand, I will. She walked straight back into the classroom, walked to the front, and gave her mini presentation. I was so proud of her, and I looked at the teacher and said, don't always give in. Give them a tool, give them support, not, oh, okay, sit down. They need that support. They need to be listened to, they need to be heard, and they need to feel safe.
And one final question, Julie, quite appropriate at the end, which is, I didn't note it down precisely, but I made a note of it as it scrolled past, which was how to evaluate one's own, the question was about counselling skills, but it could go for any of the skills and techniques that you've demonstrated or referred to.
I guess become a coach.
Really about self-evaluation.
Yeah, I think you need to self-evaluate for sure. You need to take time to reflect and think about how you could do something better. I'm very aware when I'm not listening well. It's usually because I'm trying to put out a fire. By that I mean there's a problem, it needs dealing with, deal with it. But actually that's not always the right way. I'm very aware of people who are very good at then asking the right questions. My colleague is particularly good. But I know that when I set aside time to listen, I carry out what we call appraisals. So I meet every single member of staff individually. And it's about listening and supportive listening and helping them find new objectives and goals for the following year. That's when I know I'm at my best. But I know it because I can see the results.
Thanks. Thank you, Julie. Can I just add my own postscript? You talked about 6-cat listening.
Yes.
And then on the next slide, I noticed that your heading was intervention. And it reminded me that John Heron's work in the Facilitator's Handbook, he originally described it as 6-category intervention analysis, which is quite
right. I was just writing that in the chat. That's right.
I've made extensive use of it as a teacher trainer and as a trainer to think about and to talk to fellow trainers about how to handle post-lesson discussion when you're giving feedback to trainee teachers. So I just wanted to mention for any of the attendees who are involved in training, in teacher training, that it's a particularly stimulating, a particularly productive model for that feedback situation when you're giving feedback after a lesson.
I've put it in the chat for everybody, and it's funny, I always thought it was just 6 categories of intervention, but then looking at it, some people are saying that the listening comes under the 6 categories of intervention analysis. So I wasn't quite sure there, but I've popped it in the chat for you anyway. It's certainly worth having a look.
And just to conclude, end of webinar housekeeping, questions that have been raised throughout the afternoon session. Yes, this session has been recorded. You will receive a link to the recording. Yes, there will be certificates available, but the way that works is via a link to an online survey, which then gives you instructions on how and where to download your certificate. Questions were also asked about, excuse me, documentation. And you will be receiving links to or documents. There's post-webinar set of tasks, choice of tasks, which Julie is going to tell you about in a moment. And we will also be able to let you have a copy of her PowerPoint and the pre-webinar reading in case you missed that. I think that's everything, Julie.
Yes, I think that's everything. I have actually reposted, somebody has kindly posted the links to the questionnaire, and I have reposted it. So I don't know if people can see that in the chat. I'll post it again anyway, because I've still got it in copy.
And did you want to say anything in conclusion about the post-webinar follow-up tasks?
I'll show them very quickly if that's okay.
Sure.
So I did say go home and talk to somebody, but and listen is really what I meant. But there is a follow-up task. I hope you can see this. It's just to refresh on what was said. So it's a matching task, very simple, wouldn't take you too long. But there are some things you might like to choose one or more if you'd like to do more of these tasks. There are some videos to watch and to think about and to reflect on. You could also go to the High Demand website, and you can also see 2 videos where Adrian and Jim present their ideas for this. And you could choose one of their observation tasks or that are on their blogs, and maybe ask a colleague or even one of your students, if you have the courage, to observe your lesson and give you feedback. And finally, there's a very short writing task. It's just between 250 and 350 words, not too many, just to write about what you now know that you didn't know before the webinar, and what you've now tried in the classroom, if you've tried them, or what you would like to try with your students, and how you're going to do it, and what you hope to achieve. And if you could send this to Alan Pulvaness, I will then correct them, have a look at them, and so on. Thank you very much.
On this occasion, those tasks which Julie has just mentioned, the written task particularly takes the place of what's been an assignment consisting of some kind of teaching plan or lesson plan in other webinars in this series, because clearly this wasn't a topic that lent itself to a conventional lesson plan. So Julie's prepared this task, which is more of a reflective task, as a follow-up opportunity. As you know, you're able to submit one assignment over the whole series of webinars, which are running through to March. So if this is one that particularly interests you, that's the task that's offered to you, that Julie's just shown, which is on this occasion instead of the usual kind of teaching plan. And just before we close, obviously I would like to thank Julie very warmly for a really interesting, really stimulating presentation. I know it's had lots and lots of thumbs up and smiles and hearts in the chat. So I think it resonated for probably for everyone here. And I just wanted to give a short announcement about the next webinar in the series, which will be on Friday, the 6th of October at the same time, 4 o'clock UK time. And it's on open education resources, making use of open education resources, often called open learning resources. And our presenter, who's a teacher, trainer, materials writer, coursebook writer, Jennifer Law, is going to talk about what open education resources, OERs, what they are, what forms they take, what's their purpose, and what constraints as teachers we need to be aware of in terms of permissions, why use them, why they're important in today's world of language learning, language education, how they can be instrumental in promoting EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion, when to use them, how to use them to supplement existing resources or replace existing resources, and how to use them. So it should be a very practical and very useful session if you have time to get along to that. And as usual, there'll be a recording available for anyone who can't make it. But obviously the live experience is the best thing to do if you can make it. So look forward to seeing many of you again on the 6th of October. Thanks once again to Julie, and thank you all for being here and participating and giving us so many interesting questions. Thank you.